Our author's overarching purpose can be summarized in many ways, but in this series, we'll put it this way. The author of Samuel explained how Israel's transition to kingship culminated in God's covenant with David, so that Israel would put their hopes for the kingdom of God in the righteous rule of David's house. As this summary points out, on a large scale, our author's purpose was twofold. On the one side, he focused on how Israel's transition to kingship culminated in God's covenant with David. On the other side, he wrote so that Israel would put their hopes for the kingdom of God in the righteous rule of David's house. Let's unpack both sides of our author's purpose. As we said earlier, the book of Samuel highlights what we've called that world, the century in which God led Israel from the period of the Judges to the period of kingship. Sadly, throughout the Old Testament, ancient Israelites often strayed from the ways of God because they forgot what God had done for them in the past. And knowing this, our author was careful to give his original audience a true, fully reliable record of the past. Needless to say, it would have been impossible for our author to report everything that had taken place during the century of Israel's transition toward kingship. So, he chose to concentrate on the lifetimes of three main leaders in Israel: Samuel, Saul, and David. And he dealt with the lives of these three men to establish a crucial historical fact for the nation of Israel. As our purpose summary explains, all of the events in the lives of Samuel, Saul, and David culminated in God's covenant with David. It was not until God made his covenant with David that the transition to kingship was complete. In other series, we've explained in detail how the Scriptures teach that God administered every stage of his kingdom on earth through covenants. God made covenants with all of humanity in Adam and Noah. He made covenants with the people of Israel in Abraham, Moses, and David. And Old Testament prophets predicted that after Israel's exile ended, God would make a new covenant with his people. Each of these covenants had different emphases that were appropriate for the times in which they were made. So, as each covenant incorporated the policies of earlier covenants, they also applied those earlier policies in new ways. Still, in one way or another, all of God's covenants were initiated and sustained by divine benevolence. They all required grateful human loyalty in response to God's benevolence, and they all revealed the consequences of blessings for obedience and curses for disobedience.